Ladies and gents, OverSimplified reaction. This is World War II OverSimplified Part 2 by the channel OverSimplified. I did the Part 1 a few months ago, I don't remember exactly. But then I forgot to do Part 2. Somebody said in the comments that there is no Part 2. Then I was like, oh, what the hell. So let's do it. It's World War II, obviously. I did the World War I reaction, I guess, yesterday. So World War II Part 2, we're going to see how, US is going to join in, Normandy, everything, Allied forces basically going to cross Germany, Hitler's going to kill himself. Or some things allegedly kill himself and escape to Argentina or something, which I think is absurd. I'm pretty sure he died there. But yeah, let's do this one. Remember, if you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe, check out the reaction, there's a link in the description, check out the cards or please check out the cards, and yeah, let's watch it.
This video was made possible by Skillshare, an online learning community.
Yeah, by the way, checkered box, like I say always. OverSimplified is a bit of a tricky channel to react to. Most channels, if there is a content ID, so it immediately shows up. So, I can edit it later if that's the issue. But with OverSimplified, sometimes it takes a day or two for the content ID issue to, pop up. So, yeah, that's why there's checkered box there.
Stick around until the end of the video to learn how you can get an exclusive deal just for OverSimplified viewers. So what else is happening? Well, when I said Britain was all alone, that wasn't entirely true. Many Commonwealth nations and other Allied colonies had joined the war in Britain's support. They would play a key role throughout the war, particularly in the African and Italian campaigns. On the Axis side, Germany, Italy, and Japan signed the Defensive Tripartite Pact, bringing their military alliance even closer together. The Soviet Union's war against Finland should have been an easy victory, but it became a humiliating struggle, and their military ineptitude was put on full display. In the end, they did force the Finns to sue for peace. Then, they continued their
White Death, right? I mean, that was just ridiculous what happened during that. There were lots of ice, basically. That's first time ever Russia went against a country which like cold more than them, right? Usually anybody invades Russia and then realize, oh, wait a minute, they are so good with the cold, we can't cope with that. This time, they went against Finnish people, Finland. They like cold even more. So this time, it's the Russian who suffered because of cold. And White Death, that sniper, basically.
Honorable campaign of pushing around much smaller countries by annexing the Baltic states and part of northern Romania. France's colonies in equatorial Africa were like, heck no, we aren't going to join the Germans, and they all pledged their allegiance to free France, except for Gabon, which had to be taken by military force. The Allies also tried to capture the strategic port of Dakar, but that ended in failure. Mussolini had seen Hitler's successes, and he thought now it was Italy's time to shine, so he tried to take British Somaliland, and that went pretty well. Then he tried to take Egypt, and that went less well. Then he tried to take Greece, and that went really badly. Churchill began referring
See, England's like, okay, we lost that place, let's just go. Then like, oh, they're coming from, Egypt. So they're going to try and take a Suez Canal. They're like, oh, hell no, that's never happening.
To Italy as Europe's soft underbelly. He began favoring a military campaign from the south and started sending British troops to Greece. All of this had Hitler pretty concerned, and he moved to protect his southern flank. He had been getting friendly with Hungary and twisted their arm into signing the Tripartite Pact and joining the Axis powers. Romania was also eager to join for protection against the Soviet Union. The Tripartite Pact was designed to prevent any other countries from deciding to join the Allies, specifically Britain's old ally, the pesky United States of America. When war first broke out, American public opinion was strongly against joining in. In 1940, there was an election. The Republican candidate said, I will not send any young Americans to die in Europe, and sitting President Franklin D. Roosevelt said, I will also not send any young Americans to die in Europe. Unless I have to, then I might. And Roosevelt won. Churchill asked him to join the war, but Roosevelt said, no can do, Winston, but you know what? Here, have some weapons. America began supplying the Allies with food and munitions. But
Roosevelt like, you know what? We're going to go through the process here. Usually we send supplies first, then we send the military. So here have supplies.
There was one problem. German U-boats were sinking thousands of Allied supply ships in the Atlantic, including American ones. If the Germans could sever Britain's supply line, the UK would starve. Throughout the war, the Allies had to come up with better technology to fight the U-boats. Improved radar, aircraft with longer range, better weaponry and convoy tactics. At one point, a man even called a meeting and said, Pykrete, you take some wood, you take some ice, you put them together, you get Pykrete. And then he pulled out a gun and shot some wood and it shattered. And then he shot some Pykrete and the bullet ricocheted off it and hit someone else in the conference room. And then they tried to make a
Wait a minute, did? That's so fucked up. He shot the Pykrete and it just bounced or hit somebody in the conference? Holy shit.
Pykrete aircraft carrier, but that idea was scrapped because that's a really dumb idea. Yeah. In the end, Alan Turing and his team of codebreakers cracked Germany's Enigma code, and the U-boats gradually became less and less of a threat. Back in Africa, Britain decided to push Italy out of Egypt. Hey, that was pretty easy, so they kept going. Hitler realized he was going to have to finally step in and do something. He went to Bulgaria and Yugoslavia and said, hey, I'm going to move troops through you to get to Greece, so either join us or, be invaded. Bulgaria opted to join them. Yugoslavia opted to be invaded. Then Greece finally fell to the joint German-Italian invasion. The British had moved troops from North Africa to fight in Greece, which helped Rommel and his tank divisions push the British back to Egypt, and they could have kept going, but a small, mostly Australian force held out under siege for 8 months in Tobruk, denying the Germans a strategic port city and disrupting their supply line. Despite having some success,
I'm imagining everybody's like Hugh Jackman. You want bet? You want to beat us? That's never going to happen. You can take entire continent, but you will not take this town.
In the Middle East, the British didn't seem like any real threat for now. Hey, Soviet Union, look out! With 3 million troops, Hitler launched the largest ground invasion in history, and Stalin was far from ready. Both Churchill and Roosevelt had warned him of an impending attack, but he dug his head in the sand and the Soviets didn't stand a chance. Germany made staggering progress, with huge encircling movements capturing mind-boggling numbers of Russian troops. 250,000 at Bialystok, Minsk, 300,000 at Smolensk, nearly 700,000 at Kiev, and again at Vyazma and Bryansk. Leningrad was put under a siege that would last an insufferable 4 years. The invasion of Russia had been Hitler's main ideological goal from the beginning, and his hatred for the ethnic peoples there was now unleashed in all its fury. The Eastern Front of the Second World War was brutal for all that endured it. The Germans were now inside of Moscow, and that's it.
Look, I'm not gonna lie, I know there are lots of World War II games, but they usually capture all the battles, on the top generally, right? Barely 1 or 2 mission covers entire thing, like Eastern Front. 1 or 2 missions covers it, and they just move on to some other part. I feel like there should be a comprehensive game just based on the, basically Germany's invasion of Russia and how that played out, right? Proper detailed, long ass game that just covers those particular moments and those particular years, not the entire World War II. That would be something, because also people say, I saw, how Germany could not have won World War II. And, I kind of knew that because all the videos I watched past a year and a half, that basically Hitler's ideology was against communism, right? We saw the Hitler video from Oversimplified, in which he clearly states that it was either Nazism or communism. That's where the German people was split, right? Hitler was doing the Nazi side, obviously, and other side was basically communism, which was Soviet Union at the time. So, Soviet Union and Hitler coinciding the same place is never going to work. Hitler was always going to attack them, right? Jews and the communism. That's the two enemy that he told German people that these are the problem. So obviously did that, but maybe he wouldn't have done around this time, right? He would have done it later on when he's more powerful. But here he was desperate. He was running out of all the resources and fuel, so he had to attack. Right, he had to do something to gather resources, otherwise he would have burned out pretty quickly and would have defeated like it's nothing. He would have gone out in the history as an idiot who just spent all the resources and just easily defeated. So he had to invest Soviet Union to get all the resources. But even that was failing thing, because attacking Russia at the same time attacking the Western Front, that was always going to be too much.
It's all over. But then it happened. It got cold. Stupid cold. Hitler had hoped the Soviets would give up before winter, but they kept fighting. His commanders came to him and said,
why haven't the Russians haven't give up before winter? Because winter is their friend throughout the history.
Can we please dig in for the winter and wait until spring? No. Keep going. But oil is literally freezing inside our vehicles. That's fine. Keep going. We're having to leave the corpses of our frozen horses by the side of the road so we can still find our way in the snowdrift. Perfectly normal. Keep going. Hitler hadn't given his millions of men winter clothing and supplies because he thought he really should have won by now. Then, Stalin called in troops from the Siberian front, specially trained to fight in the extreme cold, and the Germans were no match. They were now being pushed back. They had no choice but to dig in and wait for winter to end. Germany's victories were staggering, and Japan was eager not to miss the victory bus. Their war in China had come to a standstill, but they wanted to keep expanding their sphere of influence and getting those sweet, sweet raw materials. They began making plans to expand southward, but there was a problem. Southeast Asia was heavily colonized by America and Great Britain. It was also full of ocean. Ocean meant naval combat, and there was no way the Japanese Navy could stand up to the US and the UK. So they thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could destroy their navies before we begin our conquest? And so it was. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese launched a surprise air raid on the US Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor and inflicted a huge amount of damage. They also attacked British colonies in Southeast Asia. Roosevelt had no choice.
That one decision of Japan, basically, to attack Pearl Harbor and attack all the US colonies, US and British colonies, will ended up there are 2 cities being bombed. And God knows how many people dying in the process.
but to declare war on Japan, and so did Churchill. Hitler then declared war on America, even though he totally didn't have to. The attack on Pearl Harbor seemed like a big Japanese victory, but they didn't attack any of the naval repair yards, fuel storage tanks, or the submarine base, meaning
I feel like Hitler kind of knew that he's fucked, right? Even though he probably inside knew that I'm really running out of resources. I'm not winning in Russia. Basically, I'm not taking over Russia anytime soon. Sooner or later, I'm gonna be fucked. So let's just attack America too. Why not? I know that's a bit far-fetched, but that's what I feel like, because he was desperate. That's why he wanted to take Russia, but he couldn't take Russia. So I guess he must have known that I'm screwed now.
the Pacific Fleet would be up and running again pretty soon. In the meantime, though, the Japanese were able to begin their conquest. They took Guam, the Gilbert Islands, Wake Island, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. They forced Thailand to join them so they could march their troops through to Malaya. They swept through Singapore, North Borneo, the East Indies, New Guinea, the Solomons, and they were now threatening northern Australia and the borders of India. Japan's victory had been as staggering as the Germans, and it reinforced the Japanese idea that this was a divine war which they were destined to win. But their victories had been based on speed, not power, and power would eventually catch up with them. For now, though, in all occupied nations, the people suffered. Persecution, forced labor, harsh punishments for any who spoke out against their occupiers. In Europe, the Nazis were rounding up ethnic minorities and other unwanted groups and individuals. In particular, millions of Jewish people would suffer through the terrible events of the Holocaust.
Man, I still cannot go past this. Look at that. Everything is colored, while Switzerland just sit there like, yeah, there's nothing here. Nothing to see here.
Millions of Jewish people would suffer through the terrible events of the Holocaust. Brave resistance movements rose up in defiance of their invaders, while the people held out for hope. And hope was coming. Winter was over, and Hitler could continue his push eastward. But this time, he switched up his strategy. He wanted to focus on the south. His plan was to cut off the Russian armies in the Caucasus, an area full of oil, and then invade the Caucasus and take all the oil. His forces moved across the north with ease, and Hitler got cocky. He rerouted the 4th Panzer Army south early, leaving the 6th Army to complete the encircling movement alone. To do so, the 6th Army had to reach and take the key Soviet city of Stalingrad. The Russians defended it fiercely, and Stalingrad saw some of the harshest fighting of the entire war. The Soviets held up the German advance for 5 months as they battled in the war-torn city, which bought them valuable time. When the Germans had first launched their invasion a year earlier, the Soviets had moved their factories to the east. Those factories had been building a butt-ton of tanks and aircraft and getting the Soviet army up to scratch. Now, it was ready. Stalin gathered his new and improved forces around the city, and in an attack that resembled Hitler's own encirclement tactics, they began surrounding the 6th Army. Hitler's commanders came to him and said, "Hey, maybe we should retreat." But Hitler said, "No, you stay." The entire 6th Army was trapped and had to surrender. With complete air superiority, the Soviets started pushing westward. For Stalin, it was a resounding victory. For Hitler, an absolute catastrophe. Things also weren't looking too good for Hitler elsewhere. With America now in the war, Allied bombing over German cities reached devastating levels. In Africa, the British had pushed Rommel back again. Then they were pushed back again, and finally, after a decisive battle at El Alamein, and with American and British troops arriving in the west, the Germans and Italians were squeezed out of Africa. Japan was also already seeing its rapid success being turned around. They attempted to take the island of Midway, but the US Navy was ready for the attack, and they sank Japan's carrier. Actually, they sank a lot of them. It was a battle from which the Japanese Navy would never recover.
Americans have just become more serious in the war. They arrived in Europe, they arrived in Africa, and now Japan's like, oh, we just kicked Americans and British out of these islands. It's like nothing. We're gonna do the same thing. And this time, US Navy is there, with stronger, with a serious face, just crushed everybody.
British, Indian, and Chinese troops held the line in the harsh jungle terrain of Burma, and the Japanese suffered losses in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea. They began to realize they were not invincible. With the Axis out of Africa, the Allies had to decide their next move. Churchill still wanted to attack from the south, while the Americans preferred a full sea invasion in northern France. All right, said the Americans, we'll do it your way. Allied forces successfully landed in Sicily and began moving north. They also carried out bombing raids over Rome. The thing was, many of the people in Sicily had...
in the Sicily, Germans didn't put that much, resistance during the Sicily. Obviously there were, there was lots of uphill battles where Germans were defending. But, afterwards they just ran away, leaving Sicily. Because at the time they knew that they're very, run thin all around the places. They're losing. So Sicily is not the one place they were about to, die hard attack. They were not about to do that. I saw that, I think, Armchair student video on that. I don't remember exactly.
Relatives living in America, and they greeted the American troops quite warmly. With the war reaching home territory, most Italians just weren't that into it, and Mussolini was suddenly very unpopular. He was voted out by his own fascist Grand Council and was toppled from power. Italy immediately began negotiations for surrender. Hitler wasn't surprised and had already sent reinforcements southward. In an operation he ironically called Operation Axis, German troops quickly disarmed Italian troops in the north. The Allies continued fighting the Germans up through Italy, but then winter set in, meaning mud, and everything slowed to a halt. "All right," said the Americans, "let's do it our way as well." Germany had made itself a lot of enemies, and millions of Allied troops had been gathering in England as factories worked around the clock producing the war material needed for a super crazy massive the likes of which the world has never seen before invasion of Europe. The Germans knew an Allied invasion would come, but they didn't know where it would land. Thanks to Allied deception tactics, they thought there was a pretty good chance it would come at Calais, but the Allies were really going to land in Normandy because it
Fake army, fake equipment, everything. Even the what? Who was the prince of some certain place of England or something? Duke of something, whatever. Went there to inspect the fake army and fake equipment. That's some next level shit.
was less fortified, and the beaches were nicer. Under the careful planning of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the invasion that had been long in the making was just about ready to go. Just one thing was preventing the launch: the British weather. For a short while, everyone sat around waiting for a decent day, and then it came. On the night of June 5th, over 1,000 bombers took off and raided coastline defenses, while paratroopers were dropped inland in a bit of a chaotic operation, tasked with sabotaging defenses and capturing key bridges to stop any German reinforcements from reaching the beaches. Early the next morning, the barrage came, as Allied ships
I
fired.
don't like paratroopers are really scary things, right? For the paratroopers. Like they just, they're supposed to jump inside this enemy territory blindly, don't know where they're going to land exactly, because you can plan it. But just a pressure of wind here and there, not good visibility, it could change drastically where you're gonna land. That's what happened most of the time. People landed where there are actual German soldiers, forts and whatever that was. They just landed there and died. This is such a effed up. You suddenly land and, oh, wait a minute, I'm in the enemy territory, there's no defense. I have to find defense, otherwise I'm gonna die immediately. Paratroopers are really, scary thing.
A huge number of shells at the German fortifications, and then the landings. The Americans at Utah and Omaha, the British at Golden Sword, and the Canadians at Juneau. It was a tremendous struggle with a great loss of life, particularly at Omaha, but the Allied troops captured the beaches and the landings were a success. Then they began their movements inland. They took the port of Cherbourg and the city of Caen. The Americans moved south to capture Brittany. Then, in a massive disaster for the Germans, British and Canadian troops from the north and Americans from the south trapped the German 7th Army in a near wipeout encircling movement. In August, Allied troops landed in the south of France to little resistance. On one beach, all they found was a Frenchman handing out champagne. Paris was liberated, and the Germans were pushed out of...
Imagine that. Americans, everybody just, all the Allied forces landed on that beach, and it's like just, some Frenchman. Yeah, take some champagne, something. They're like, this war's alright, man.
France, as the Allies entered Belgium. In the Far East, the Allies started to push the Japanese out of Burma, as the Americans launched a two-pronged offensive in the Pacific. In the south, General MacArthur led the push to liberate the Philippines, while General Nimitz oversaw the brutal island-hopping campaign. American forces had to make hard-fought landing after hard-fought landing on fiercely defended small islands as they moved steadily towards the Japanese mainland. The Japanese believed that the greatest thing a person could do was to die in battle, and the most dishonorable act was to surrender. As a result, they fought ferociously to the very end, and the closer the Americans got to the mainland, the more ferocious the resistance became. In February 1945, the Americans captured the island of Iwo Jima, and an intense firebombing campaign of Japan's wooden cities began. The Allies suffered some setbacks trying to liberate the Netherlands, but they were making progress and were now threatening the industrial heartland of Germany. Hitler's health, both mentally and physically, was rapidly deteriorating. Things were looking bad, and he was desperate. He said, "We need to turn this thing around, and I have just the trick. Remember a few years back when we blitzkrieged through the Ardennes and trapped the Allied forces in Belgium? Well, I'm going to do the exact same thing. Again." He gathered his forces and tried to pound them through the Ardennes. He used up the remainder of Germany's strength and resources, and he managed to create quite a nice bulge. He also trapped some American forces in the Belgian town of Bastogne. The Germans sent the trapped Americans a message saying surrender or be annihilated. When it was read out to the commanding officer, he said, "They want to surrender? No, sir, they want us to surrender." Nuts! And that's what they sent off as their official reply. General Patton's Third Army then managed to break the siege from the southwest, and the Germans were pushed back. Hitler...
Americans like, dude, we are trapped, I know that, but you do realize there are way too many Americans around you, right? I mean, we are not dying anytime soon. You're the one who's gonna die now.
His last-ditch attempt had failed, and what followed was a total collapse of the German forces. The Allies pushed into Germany from both sides. The Soviet Union took Warsaw and kept pushing to Berlin.
Whoa,
in his bunker,
Soviet Union just
realized
walked
all
past.
hope was lost.
Man, that was way too fast for Soviet Union to do that.
Was a total collapse of the German forces. The Allies pushed into Germany from both sides. The Soviet Union took Warsaw and kept pushing to Berlin. In his bunker, Hitler realized all hope was lost. Berlin fell, And with it, Hitler's
I think he realized that a long time ago, right? After his campaign in Russia, Soviet Union basically lagged around when the snow came. I think around that time he knew. That's why lots of his decisions were nuts, right? He was not telling any of his team to retreat. He's like, this is the end anyway. If you're not successful, you might as well die. That was his mentality. That's why he wasn't telling anybody to retreat at that time.
dreams of a great German empire. Two of the Axis nations had been knocked out. One to go. The Americans began their assault on Okinawa, the last island before they would reach the Japanese mainland. The desperate Japanese fought hard, launching kamikaze attacks on the US ships. The citizens of Okinawa suffered through the terrible fighting, but in 2 months, the island was captured. The Allies now had to make a choice. Either continue the devastating struggle up the Japanese mainland, or they could try to coerce the Japanese into surrendering now. In July, the first successful atomic bomb test took place in New Mexico, and the destructive weapon was ready for use. America and the UK were also seeing the Soviet Union...
Was that Oppenheimer? Who's his name? The scientist. I've become death or something like that. His quote is, that's just the guy who knows that I created something that is way too scary, way too powerful. Even though, lots of people argue about the Japan, like, Japan, all the, bombing of the Japan was about to surrender anyway. There was no need for atomic bombs. But so far, all the history videos I've seen, it basically says that the Japan's mentality at the time that, either we die, heroic, or we kill ourselves if we surrender, something like that. I don't know. So their mentality was, fight until the end, right? Even they were even enlisting civilians inside the Japan to ready for fight. So if US and Allied forces had invaded Japan, that would have been bloody war. Lots of civilians, Japanese civilians would have died anyway. This way, 2 cities were bombed, which was horrific. Lots of civilians died, which is just horrific to think about. You can't even visualize it. It's so horrific. But overall picture, I feel like more Japanese would have died if US had invaded. I think that's what I think. So in the end, atomic bomb, ended the war, and it, had the least casualties in Japanese side too. Obviously from US side too, because if US had invaded, lots of US soldiers would have died too. But even from Japanese perspective, it was less casualties because they were about to fight till the end.
Not so much liberating as occupying its captured territories. And so they wanted to put on a show of force. On August 6th, the A-bomb fell on Hiroshima. Then, on the 9th, Nagasaki. The cities were reduced to rubble, and for the people living there, it was a terrible fate. But for the Allies, it achieved their main aim. In September, the Emperor...
Yeah, and also there was one businessman who was in Nagasaki. I think he was there. Not Hiroshima, right? I don't know. He was in one of those cities before the bomb fell. Then he left through plane and then bomb fell. Then he went to the other city which is about to be bombed. And then he left again and then bomb fell. The guy went to the both cities which were bombed just moments ago and left. One of the luckiest guy ever lived, right? He was one businessman. I forgot his name, but he's well known, I guess. Even, did TED Talk or something. I don't know.
Announced Japan's surrender, saying the war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. After 6 years, war was finally over. The Allies occupied Japan for 8 years. The Emperor was allowed to keep his position, but General MacArthur made sure this picture was printed in the Japanese press to display to the Japanese people that their Emperor was not the divine, powerful being they had believed. Germany was divided between America, the UK, France, and the Soviet Union. In 1949, the Allied sectors were united into West Germany. The Second World War had been more terrible and destructive than the first. In its aftermath, 2 major superpowers with 2 very different ideologies had come out victorious, and the tension between the 2 of them would create a new kind of war. A very, very cold one. Wow, Churchill, that looks just like me. And your app is doing really well. And this quesadilla you made is to die for. How'd you learn to do all this stuff? I used the link in the description to get 2 months of Skillshare for just 99 cents. Wow, tell me more. Okay. Skillshare is an online learning...
Yeah, people go to skillshare.com/oversimplified 2 and support that channel. Yeah, Cold War was cold only because of atomic bombs. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been so cold. I mean, there would have been playing out open battles before somebody comes to some kind of a ceasefire treaty. Then after a decade or 2, another battle, like how Europe has been at war for centuries, just like that. Atomic bomb is the only reason why somebody thinks even small battle here and there could cause a city to blow up. So let's not do that. People didn't want to engage in even a ship to ship, a small battle. Before that, nobody cared. Small battle here and there happens. Then they sign some treaty or truce temporarily. Then somebody attacks again. That's how it's always been for centuries. After atomic bomb, nobody was even ready to attack a small ship because they know that could result in a bomb firing in one of their cities. Alright people, that was World War II Simplified Part 2 by the channel OverSimplified. If you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out the reaction, there's a link in the description with all of my videos. Check out the cast of the playlists like OverSimplified with all of my OverSimplified reaction, history with all historical videos like extra credits and different, overly sarcastic production, inter historian, CGP Grey. And yeah, I'll see you next time.